But the whole thing is just, there is so much to know about this assassination that nobody knows, and that's why it appears to be controversial. It's really not. It only appears to be controversial because there's such a wide gap between the knowledge of people who listen to the mass media and still kind of trust the government, accept the government's pronouncements on the one hand, versus those people on the other hand who've actually studied the case.
Yeah.
But let me tell you, for example, do you know the names Bill and Gail Newman?
No.
You don't remember them because you never see them.
No.
And yet, if you'll think back, Jeff, to the photographs that were taken in Dealey Plaza at the time of the Kennedy assassination, some of the most poignant images was Bill and Gail Newman lying on their small children to protect
that's
them.
right. I remember those pictures.
Remember them?
Yeah, sure.
That's Bill and Gail Newman.
Yeah.
Well, now, whatever happened to them? Nothing. They still live in Grand Prairie, Texas, just in a suburb of Dallas. They've been there all this time. They were the closest witnesses to Kennedy at the fatal headshot. Okay? So how come we never see any interviews with them? You know why? Because on the day, within 2 hours of the assassination, Bill Newman and his family were in one of the Dallas TV stations being interviewed, and he said the shots came from right up behind us on what you call that little knoll. Okay? And to this very day, I sent the Japanese camera crew over there, and I called him up and said, hey, Bill, I said, would you talk to these Japanese TV people? He said, sure. They went over there, sat down, interviewed both of them, and they told them the same thing today that they told 40 years ago. The shots came from up behind them on the grassy knoll.
And they haven't been shot.
That's why ABC is not going to interview the Newman family.
No,
They're not, because they don't want you to hear that.
I'm amazed.
Isn't that amazing?
I'm amazed. I'm further amazed that they're still talking.
They've never changed their story. They were never called to testify before the Warren Commission.
Closest people to the murder.
The closest people to the president when he was shot, just average, good, solid Americans. They still run their own company, electrical company there in Grand Prairie. They're the nicest, most down-to-earth people you've ever met, and they were never called to testify to the Warren Commission, and they're never interviewed by the mass media. Isn't that amazing? Now, let me tell you what's even more amazing.
Hold on. We got a break. Will tell us that in just a minute, Jim. Okay, we're right back with Jim Marrs. You know, just that one item, Jim, the fact that a bullet struck that curb and that was acknowledged finally, had to be, that takes the whole Lee Harvey Oswald lone gunman thing and puts it in the trash.
Well, except for Senator Arlen Specter. Arlen Specter, back in '64, was a young attorney working for the Warren Commission. And see, early on, within a week of the assassination, J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI had issued a report that gave an account of the assassination, and they said there were 3 shots fired within 6 seconds, and that the first shot struck Kennedy in the back, and the second shot hit Connally and caused his wounds, and the third shot hit Kennedy in the right side of the head and killed him. How? Okay, believable scenario. All right, the problem was the strike on the curb. And it not only was a strike on the curb, it wasn't anywhere near the car. It was down on Main Street, which is another street over, okay? And it was down near the triple underpass, and it threw up concrete and nicked and caused a small cut on the cheek of a car salesman named Jim Tague, who I've also spoken with. Now, Jim Tague tried to contact the Warren Commission and tell them what had happened, but they didn't want to hear that, so they were ignoring him until midway in the spring of '64. And then what happened is very interesting. An assistant U.S. attorney in Dallas wrote a letter to the Warren Commission and included a photograph from the Dallas news media of the bullet strike on the curb and mentioned that a fellow had been wounded. Another person had been wounded in that gunfire on the Kennedy motorcade. Well, oops. Now it's not just Jim Tague, the car salesman. Now it's an assistant U.S. attorney. They can't very well ignore that. So Arlen Specter went to work, and he came up with the brilliant idea that there was what is now known as the single bullet theory, or more correctly, the magic bullet theory. And he finally worked it all out. Since they knew it had to be Oswald and only one assassin, it couldn't be anybody else, then they had to figure out how you get these 3 shots to cause all this damage within 6 seconds. So what the Warren Commission came out with, their scenario, which they never clearly elucidated, but they inferred that the first bullet passed through Kennedy's neck and didn't hit anything, went on and caused all of Connolly's wounds. The second shot missed, hit the curb on Main Street, nicked James Tague. Third shot hit Kennedy in the head. Okay, now this is the most cockamamie idea in the whole world, and the whole thing that it rests on is the idea that the bullet went through President Kennedy's neck.
Right.
Well, if you don't get anything out of this program tonight other than this, please listen to this carefully. President Kennedy was never shot through the neck. Okay? He was shot in the back at the level of the 3rd thoracic vertebra, according to the autopsy report, with a diagram that shows a bullet to the right of the spinal column, below the shoulder blade.
Right.
Okay? Now, he did have a wound in the neck, but every medical doctor in Dallas who saw this puncture wound in his throat at the level of the Adam's apple said it was a puncture wound. It was a wound of entrance from the front at his Adam's apple, and there was no exit wound that they could find. So the Warren Commission, in their diligent search for evidence to support the lone assassin theory, said that the bullet entered the back, passed through Kennedy's body, came out the throat, and went on to strike Connolly.
Yeah, but it changed direction after it came out of his throat.
It changed direction in his body.
Yeah.
And then, if it came and entered the 3rd thoracic vertebra below the shoulder blades, and then somehow, without hitting anything, coursed upwards and passed out through his neck, now it's going upwards.
It had to dive back down.
And how does it turn in midair and come back down to hit Connolly?
Right.
Can't do it. It's just absolutely insane, and it just really troubles me that the poor old dumbed-down American public even bought that lemon, you know?
I didn't. I mean, I looked at the guys, we saw analyses of it where people drew straight lines in it. Bullets don't go in crooked, curved arcs.
They don't curve and swerve and swoop. It's a supersonic missile, goes in a direct straight line unless it hits of some very hard object, and it can be deflected, okay? But it doesn't turn around in midair. Just can't do it. So there is the whole crux of the case right there, because if you don't have the magic bullet theory that this bullet swimmed and swerved and entered Kennedy's back and coursed upward through his body, then coursed downward in midair and then struck Connolly and went through his right chest and then came out and went through his right wrist and then ended up in his left leg, you know, if you can't buy that, then there is no single assassin theory.
Hey, who planted the magic bullet on the stretcher?
Jack Ruby.
How did he get that close?
Because he walked, I talked to the TV newsman who knew Ruby, and he said he grabbed up some of their equipment, you know, and he walked in the hospital with them.
No kidding.
And he was seen at Parkland Hospital. In fact, Penn Jones saw him and took a picture of him.
No kidding. I never knew that. I always
never knew that?
I knew the...
See, that's the problem, Jeff, and you're a smart guy, and you know a lot about this
I tried to figure out who put...
Information does not get out to people.
I was trying to figure out who put the magic bullet, who placed
Jack Ruby did. He slipped in the hospital. He was seen at the hospital right around 1 o'clock, and photographed at the hospital. And that's another thing. The bullet was found on a stretcher in just a major hallway.
Yeah.
And that stretcher could never be conclusively connected to either Connolly or Kennedy. It wasn't Kennedy's stretcher for sure, because they ran him right in and put him in the one of the ER rooms.
Right.
Now, they tried to say it was Connolly's because they later took him up and loaded him on another stretcher and took him up to the operating theaters, okay? But Daryl Tomlinson, the maintenance man there at the hospital when the Warren Commission, and you ought to read his testimony. They browbeat him. They got him so confused. They tried like the devil to get him to say that bullet was on Connolly's stretcher, and he never would do it because it wasn't. Isn't that amazing? Now, here's another thing. So if Kennedy, if the autopsy, if his coat, if his bloody shirt, if all of the evidence proves beyond any doubt that Kennedy was shot at the 3rd thoracic vertebra, below the shoulder blade, in the back, okay, then where did the idea come from, and why did the Warren Commission report that he was shot through the neck? Gerald R. Ford. our only unelected president with no known medical credentials. In 1997, the House Assassinations Record Review Board, which was mandated by Congress to dig up any government documents relating to the assassination, discovered a memo from Ford to the authors of the Warren Commission report in which he told them to change the wording from Kennedy was shot in the back to Kennedy was shot through the neck. That's where that came from, not from the medical evidence, but because Gerald Ford told him to put it that way.
A team player all the way.
A team player all the way, and by the way, the documents also show that Gerald Ford was spying for the FBI on the Warren Commission and reporting back to J. Edgar Hoover everything that was going on. So he was more than a team player. And he got his payoff, didn't he?
He sure did.
He got to be president for a little while.
Yeah, he got to be president for a little while.
And let me tell you this. You're going to love this. The other day I was talking to a newsman down here, and I was trying to explain some of this stuff to him, and he was kind of a younger guy, but he was at least listening. He was real interesting. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, he says, well, what about Gerald Ford? I said, well, it's really interesting. I said, I've seen lots of interviews with Gerald Ford. He's the last surviving member of the Warren Commission. And I said, in every instance, he always uses the exact same words. He has never stated that there was no conspiracy. What he always says is, we could find no evidence of conspiracy. And I said, technically, he's probably telling the truth, but realistically, they could not find evidence of conspiracy because they didn't look for it. In fact, they systematically, discarded anything
that would lead him in that direction. Sure.
Now, this newsman I'm talking to starts laughing. I said, what's so funny? He said, I talked to him yesterday. I said, you did? He said, yeah. I said, what did he say? He laughed. He said, we could find no evidence of conspiracy.
That's great.
Repeated my words back to me. Isn't that funny?
That is very funny.
And see, this is the linguistic and semantics that they use to befuddle everybody. See, they don't want to just come out and lie and say there was no conspiracy.
No.
So they say, well, we could find no evidence of conspiracy. Well, of course not, because they didn't look for it. In fact, they systematically discarded anything that smacked of conspiracy, like not talking to the Newmans.
Oh, we could go on and on.
Oh, yeah, I could go on and on with all of that. It's incredible. Well, the Warren Commission did acknowledge that Sam Holland, a railroad supervisor who was up on the Triple Underpass, they did acknowledge that he said that he saw smoke coming out from behind the picket fence and on those trees there on the grassy knoll. And they just kind of stated, he said that, and then they just kind of left it at that, and he was just one guy out of that whole 888 pages. So it's like, well, I guess he was mistaken. What they didn't tell you is there were 13 other railroad workers up on that overpass, and they all saw and heard the same thing, and they all said the same thing, and the Warren Commission never talked to any one of those except for Sam Holland. Isn't that amazing? And doesn't that show what an absolute farce the Warren Commission was?
Well, beyond one of the darkest chapters in American history, obviously.
Except maybe for the new 9/11 Commission.
Yeah, that's right up there with it.
And they're doing the same.
They were going to subpoena documents.
They're saying, well, gee, we can't show all those briefings, daily briefings the president got, national security. Well, why is that? Isn't that gleaned usually from newspaper accounts and stuff? So now they're going to let one person look at it and tell us, and it'll probably be the committee chairman who happens to be a huge Bush supporter.
It's amazing. By the way, Gerald Ford was the first of two unelected presidents in our country's history.
That's true.
All right. Hey, Jim, great to talk with you again, and maybe we'll connect up right before the 22nd again if I've got time, if you've got time.
Hey, that'd be great. I mean, there's so much stuff we could talk about. We could fill up a whole show.
Okay.
And people need to know this stuff.
They do.
I am so sickened by the fact that the mass corporate media...
Okay. Got to run, Jim. Got to run, and I'll talk to you. We'll try and get you back on. Talk soon.